All right. Good evening, Ken. We're live. Thanks for joining me. I'm going to give you the floor really quick. If you could just introduce yourself for my audience, who you are, what you do, what you're building with Turning Point in the recruiting space.
Sounds great. Yeah, thanks, Connor. I appreciate the invitation to join you tonight. Yeah, so my name is Ken Schmitt. I'm executive CEO and founder of Turning Point Executive Search. I'm based here in San Diego. I've got about 27 years of total experience behind me, but started at Turning Point about 17 years ago. And we are all about recruiting leaders across the country, across a pretty wide variety of industries and sectors, primarily for middle and lower to middle market companies in technology, software, manufacturing, professional services, you name it. We do the industry, and it's a big focus around leadership positions.
Very cool. And I'm curious why executives, and when you say executive search, does that mean C-suite exclusively, or are you also looking for more, directors, VPs, middle management as well?
Yeah, we really don't focus so much on the title. It's more the kind of the breadth and depth of the position. So typically the titles tend to be director, VP, and C-suite titles, but we also do, a fair number of manager, titled searches, but it's more about kind of the seasoned nature of the candidate and the breadth of their experience. So we're not, recruiting people that are just 2, 3, or even 5 years out of school. It's typically, professionals that have 8 to 10 years of experience or more. And executive can mean a lot of different things. Just depends on the size of the company. In some companies that are 15-20 million dollars in revenue, the head of marketing or the head of sales can be director by title, but they're reporting up to the CEO or to the founder and or to the board if there is one. And then other times that manager title or director title is 4 or 5 levels down below the CEO. Again, depending upon the kind of the business sophistication and maturity, but also mainly the size of the organization. So yeah, so executive just means that it's not entry level junior people. It's really mid and more senior career.
Makes sense. What do you recommend, right? I think you brought up an interesting point is you can come into a smaller company and be the manager of sales or director of sales and report to the CEO, or you can go for more of a mid-sized company where you're lost in the shuffle more, but you have more resources available to you. I mean, do you have a recommendation working with candidates? I mean, in terms of career growth and opportunities, is it better to go for that smaller company or more mid-sized, more established company where you may have to, be farther away from the CEO and the action, but it provides some other benefits. I don't know if you typically guide people in one direction over the other.
Yeah, there's not really one kind of blanket answer in terms of what's quote unquote better or worse or right or wrong. It's just it's a very individual type decision. And I think the broader question and the broader topic I would bring up is make sure that you spend the time throughout your career, no matter where you are, early on, middle, or towards the end. Spend the time, take the time to take a bit of an inventory and figure out where you thrive. Some people spend their entire careers working at IBM or Nike or Johnson and Johnson, and then after 15-20 years they say I want to make a change, and maybe they take an early package or they go through a downsizing, or they just decide to leave on their own for something new, and they say I want to work at a smaller company. Well, the chances are pretty much 90% of the companies that are out there are going to be smaller than IBM or J&J or Nike, right? So, understand what that means in terms of what smaller is, but more importantly, B, is understand the differences in the dynamic and the operating style and communication style and how quickly things move and how agile things are, how difficult or easy it is for decisions to get made. Understand that there's a pretty significant difference between the 10-50 billion dollar companies out there and a company that's doing only 50 million. Things just move at a very, very different pace. And people might say they want to work at a smaller company because, to your point, they don't want to be that that kind of small fish in a very large pond, but they don't quite realize how different things really are. They don't realize that they're so accustomed to having the policies and procedures and structure in place, and really kind of the resources also at their disposal at those really large, Fortune 100, Fortune 1000 companies. When you compare that to a company that's a fraction of the size, it's very different. And you've got to be willing to be very scrappy or resourceful and very hands-on in those smaller businesses. So as you move through your career, and I recommend folks that are early on in their career that they start taking a bit of a professional inventory at each step along the way, and figure out, okay, what did I like about this? What didn't I like? What was good about this in terms of how I interacted with my boss, who my boss was, what their background was, how big was the team around me, what was my peer group, did I enjoy working for a company where things weren't very buttoned up and it was a little bit more kind of the wild, wild west, a bit chaotic, like in a startup or early stage company? Or did I actually prefer working for an IBM or a J&J where things were more structured? Yeah, maybe I didn't have as much say in the final decision. I wasn't as strategic, but I liked the fact that it was more predictable and more, consistent as far as the day-to-day operation. So it's just really a matter of taking the time to get to know yourself.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Would you say that you mentioned these big brands, IBM, J&J, IBM? From my perspective, it seems there is more competition in terms of wanting to work in leadership at those organizations. But then you go for that smaller company, which, whatever it is, that's making $50 million a year. I would assume that they have more recruiting challenges getting that really highly qualified, high quality candidate. I mean, is that fair to say? Is that there are smaller companies out there that are looking for really good talent, and then for these larger companies, they're able to secure it more easily?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if it's easier or harder. I think, for example, a larger company is, typically, just by design, or by nature of who they are more visible. So it's much easier to say, I'm looking for a new VP of sales job and I'm in technology. Who do I go to? The companies, the IBMs, the Metas, the Netflixes, all those companies out there that are in technology. So from a visibility perspective, yes, it's easier. But that being said, because it's easier for you, that means it's easier for everybody. So for a $50 million company, they might post a role or put a search out for a VP of sales. They might get whatever 15, 20, 50 resumes. If you're IBM and you put that rec out there, that open position, you're going to get several hundred resumes, which means you as the candidate are now competing with a much wider, much larger pool of individuals out there. So again, it's not, I wouldn't say either one is a black and white, right or wrong or better or worse. It's just a different dynamic. I think, and if you look at the numbers out there, I mean, 2/3 of employment is taken up by small to mid-sized companies. Now, the companies that you always hear about in the press and the media is the ones that again are more visible, like I mentioned before. When they're doing layoffs or they're hiring, those are what you hear about. Whereas you don't hear about the Main Street companies that are doing, like I said, $50-100 million in revenue, that are publicly traded, that are being run by maybe second or third generation family, or they're owned by a family office, or they're owned by a private equity firm, but not one of the big, KKRs or one of the really big PE firms out there. So if you are able to make connections and uncover those smaller to mid-sized companies, you're typically going to have less competition going after certain positions, and you have a much better chance of leveraging your network, building those connections, and taking advantage of those connections to help you get your foot in the door. If you're trying to get into J&J or Nike or IBM with 200,000-300,000 employees, the odds of any one person being able to walk your resume into the head of HR or into the hiring manager is kind of small, right? But if it's a $50 million company and they only have 250 employees, you have a much, much better chance of really kind of getting known, getting that visibility out there, and being able to more effectively leverage your network in those organizations. So it's a matter of, I think honestly, if you can put the legwork into finding and uncovering those smaller mid-sized companies that are private, that are not in the public eye day in and day out, you're probably going to be better off in the long run.
And do you have any recommendations on how you find those companies and those diamonds in the rough too? I mean, is it just simply looking online? Is it using your network? And I think one of the things that can happen with those smaller companies, how do you know what you're getting into? How do you know what the reputation is, or that they're in a good place financially? I mean, I think you can assume that Nike, right, or J&J, and they have a market cap of hundreds of billions of dollars. You say, okay, I'm not going to get myself in a situation where this company's on the downturn. But if you're going for a smaller company, it seems like that'd be a higher risk. So how do you balance those two things? Researching, and then also finding the right one, and ensuring you're entering a good situation.
Yeah, well, in terms of the second question, I'll take that first. I think, even though a company might be more visible and larger and Fortune 500, publicly traded, what have you, that doesn't necessarily mean they're more stable. mean, if you look at a lot of the layoffs that are happening right
Mm.
now, here we're talking in early 2024, most of the layoffs that are happening that you're hearing about are with big public companies, no matter what the industry might be, whether it's, at Etsy, or whether it's at IBM, or whether it's at Meta, or whether, whatever, whoever it might be, company after company that is large, right? That is quote unquote established and more mature. A lot of those folks are doing layoffs right now. So just by nature of it being a larger, more visible company, certainly does not protect you from having it be, having there be layoffs. And these are people that were hired only a couple of years ago in the really big run up in 2021 and 22, where so many of these big companies were making so many hires. Now there are a lot of them are trying to right size and figure out, okay, so what is the most appropriate headcount for us given the new growth trajectory that we now have. I also think that companies that are public and large, they tend to have to, not only are they having to abide by quarterly SEC and revenue numbers and reporting the revenue numbers, but also they have to really kind of follow their shareholders, and the shareholders want to maximize their investment. And the best way to do that is to cut costs, right, and increase revenue. Well, one of the best ways to cut costs is by cutting people. Every company out there, labor by far is almost always the biggest cost on their P&L sheet. So it's a matter of they are also more beholden to having to manage those costs versus smaller to mid-sized company that might be privately held. So I wouldn't say that the bigger companies are necessarily better off or more stable by any stretch. I think it might be a little easier to find the information about how that company is doing, but at the same time, you can research the industry overall, and whether you're trying to get into a big company or a small company within that industry, the same macro trends out there that will affect the J&Js are also going to affect the smaller biotechs and pharma companies. As far as your first question about how to uncover them, that again is kind of back to the legwork. So I've been recruiting for 27 years, since the late 90s, and back in the late 90s, as a recruiter and as a job seeker as well, the hard part was trying to figure out, okay, where are the companies that I want to get into? Where do I want to apply for a job? And as a recruiter, the hard part was trying to figure out who the best people were. Who are the top performers in any given function, in a given sector, in a given region? And we used to have to pay people. There were these firms we pay they would build out org charts for us, to find out who we wanted to go after for a given position. So it was before LinkedIn. The internet was obviously just getting started in the late 90s. Fast forward to today in 2024, and now it's much, much easier to figure out who to recruit, who the top performers are as an employer. And it's much, much easier to find the companies themselves. But now the secret sauce is about the messaging. How do you as a candidate get in front of the kind of company that you want to work for? And then how do you as a company, get the top performers to respond to you when you're trying to fill an open position? So it comes down to, research through your LinkedIn network. I mean, there's no better, resource out there than LinkedIn. And you can figure out, you can do searches very easily, even with the free version of LinkedIn, that'll allow you to slice and dice the billion, member LinkedIn network in many, many different ways, by industry, by region. You can look at companies that, tend to hire people from a certain school. You can look at, CEOs that are in San Diego, that are in banking, that also went to USD, where I went to school. I mean, you can slice and dice it in so many different ways, but it takes time. It takes time to do that kind of research, but you're much better off when you do it, because now you know the kind of companies that you want to be able to go out and target based on your research. And there's also a lot more opportunity in terms of networking events, which weren't really around in the late 90s by any stretch. So you can go to different trade associations and organizations, whether they're functionally focused, like around CFOs or CTOs or technology folks, or whether they're focused in a certain region, or maybe they're a particular industry, like Biocom, for example, here in Southern California is really, really big, or Octane, which is also very big in the technology space. So, I mean, there are a lot of networking groups that you can become a part of, either in person or virtually, and be able to research companies and find them out, that way also. I'm a really big believer also in the business journal, and, pretty much every, at least medium to large city around the country has a local business journal. And in most cases, you can subscribe for, very, very inexpensively, and they will give you on a weekly basis a list of companies that are expanding, growing, moving into the city, that are acquiring companies. And then I know, like here in San Diego and most of the chapters in California, they also do an annual book of lists. And that book of lists is literally a list of the top 50, top 100 companies in any given sector. And that's a really, really great research tool to figure out where are the companies and who are the companies that I want to go after. And you can get access to those books no matter what city you happen to be in, and you can access them for any other city around the country. So the research tools are out there. It's not that difficult to identify the companies. The key is to figure out, now that I know the company I want to work for, how do I get my foot in the door and get noticed and get a call back, if you will. And that's where leveraging your LinkedIn network comes into play.
Yeah, I think a lot of good points. And I want to back up to the first point you made, because I think I agree that, a big company will just kind of cut you and not even think twice about it. And you're totally a number on the spreadsheet. And then another thing I thought of as well, as you mentioned earlier, if you're at a $15 million or $50 million a year company and you're the VP of sales and you're like the entire sales force, it puts that CEO, that founder, owner of the company in a tough situation, because unless you're just totally screwing up, getting rid of you creates this big hole in the company, and then it just basically puts more work on their plate, and they have to pick up the slack, right? So in a way, it kind of insulates you in that they don't necessarily have readily available options. So I don't know if you come across that or would agree with that point, but just something I thought with your first point there.
Yeah, it's a good point you bring up, and I think you have a much better likelihood and much better chance of being cross trained in a smaller organization, because to your point, there are just fewer people, right? A $50 million company has fewer people than a $500 million company or a $50 billion company, and so you tend to be, we have an expression that's you kind of compared, you want to be an inch wide and a mile deep, or other way around, where you're a mile wide and an inch deep. And usually the bigger companies, you're the former, you're the inch wide, mile deep. So you're doing one task or several tasks, let's say, but you're doing it, top to bottom. So there's that vertical kind of integration and focus, but not usually a whole heck of a lot of cross training. And so any one person is a little bit more, I don't know, you're not as indispensable. Let's put it that way. If you're doing one thing, whereas if you're cross trained, now you have the ability to do multiple jobs. If there is a downturn, if there is a requirement for a restructuring or a layoff, that kind of thing, if you can demonstrate that you've been trained in a lot of different areas and you can very effectively wear multiple hats and multitask and be adaptable across different functions, then you've just made yourself much more valuable in that organization. And to your point, perhaps that CEO might have a harder time letting you go versus somebody that only has one, very specific skill set.
Yeah, no, very good points. And then I want to kind of jump back to the second point you made, where, basically you're saying in this age of technology, there's really not an excuse to get in front of the people that you want to get in front of. And I just wanted to, because I'll be just scrolling on LinkedIn. I'm not even looking to apply at any of these jobs, but if you just click on a job listing on LinkedIn, it'll be for whatever, director of sales for whatever company. It'll say posted 3 days ago, and there's 270 applicants, and it just shows it, right? And I mean, it just seems like, how do you stand out in that scenario? It seems like with every job posting online, that's just the case these days. So I don't know if you maybe have some insight into that as a recruiter. Is it a lot of people that are just not qualified? And then considering that, and I think I know your answer, how do you stand out? Obviously, you mentioned networking events, reaching out to hiring managers, founders, et cetera. But I mean, that seems to be a problem that the internet creates, right? It really helps create visibility, but then everybody is just swarms to that application. So I don't know if you have any insight into that from your perspective.
No, yeah, you're exactly right. And there's a lot of different things to unpack there for sure. But yeah, I was talking to a senior executive, a chief commercial officer earlier today, and we were chatting about that very subject, that, they're looking, and they're about a 25 employee company, so they're not huge, but they're expanding, they're growing, and they want to find the right person. But they'll put a posting out onto LinkedIn for, what is really a very highly sought after type of a position. And they'll get, 350 or 400 resumes. And it just takes so much time for that hiring manager to scroll through all those to find the 3 to 5 people that are actually qualified and appropriate for that position. So again, back to the point earlier about LinkedIn has made it so easy to apply to any job out there that unfortunately a lot of people do that when they really have no business applying to a given position. So in terms of standing out, a few things come to mind. First of all, to that point I just made, make sure when you're applying to a position that you are applying to a role that you're really qualified for. And you don't need to have 100% of the criteria. I mean, usually job descriptions are written with the expectation that 75 to 80% of that experience will more than suffice to do the job. But you've got to make sure that you are qualified in the most important 75 to 80% skill set that they're looking for. If you say, well, I've got 50%, it says I have to do this, this, and this. I haven't done any of that, but I can learn, and you apply, then don't be surprised if you never hear back from that company, right? Because there's too many other folks that are applying that do have that skill. So be sure that you're truly applying for the positions that make sense for you and your skill set. Secondly, make sure that you really are taking the time to look at the job description, read through it thoroughly. A lot of folks, I think, also just look at the job title, maybe the first summary paragraph, and they don't really read through the details of the role. And if they did, they'd realize that, oh yeah, I don't have these 3 skills, and clearly that is an absolute must-have, so I'm not even going to bother applying. So make sure you read through the job description thoroughly and truly understand the role. The third thing is that once you do that, and let's say you read the job description, you've done some research on the company, it's a company that you want to work for in the right geography and all those kinds of things, then you need to tailor your resume. I think people assume that I'm going to have one great resume. It's going to cover everything, and that'll suffice. That'll be enough. When the reality is, there's no way that a general resume that you create can really cover the most germane, important aspects of a job for every situation. You've got to take the time, the extra 15, 20 minutes, and customize your resume. It doesn't mean you have to create a whole new resume every time. 80% of your resume, your template, so to speak, will be the same with every job that you apply to. But it's that other 20% that you really need to spend the time customizing and really making sure that it speaks directly to that company, to that hiring manager, and to that specific job that you're applying to. Make sure it shows that, and that's a great way to stand out. That's the third thing. The fourth thing is that, and this is obviously not possible or realistic in every position, but whenever possible, try your best to really figure out, who do I know at this company? Do I have any way to get my foot in the door beyond just sending in my resume to an application somewhere on LinkedIn? We always talk about how every company has 2 piles of resumes, whether it's physical or digital. There's the A pile, right? And the A pile are people that were referred in, that were recommendations from current employees or board members or CPAs or friends of the HR team, whatever it might be. That A pile is really going to be the folks that are there are there because they got referred in and there's some endorsement. The B pile is everybody that applied to the job online. And that second pile is usually the largest, but it's also usually the least likely to get noticed. So your goal as a job applicant is to get yourself into that A pile. Find some way to do that. Maybe you went to the same school or grew up in the same area as the hiring manager or somebody else in the company. And maybe you've got a connection through LinkedIn or just through your network or somewhere else that you can say, hey, you know what? We know each other through this or through that person. And you can reference that when you're applying to a job. That's also a big thing to do. So yeah, I mean, it's easier said than done, I realize. But those are the things you can do to kind of get noticed. And then the fifth thing I would say is that, follow-up is really important. Once you send your resume into that organization, if you don't hear back, which is, kind of typical these days, it's perfectly legitimate and appropriate to give them a call a couple of days after you applied and try to get a hold of the hiring manager and have a conversation with them and say, hey, I'm doing a lot of networking. I'm out there looking, I'm in job search mode right now. I sent my resume in. I may not be the right fit for this job, but I want to get a feel for what your plans are for hiring later on, or if I can refer somebody to you if I'm not the right fit. Find a way to stand out and be different than everybody else that's calling in, and find a way to kind of be a value add to that hiring manager by offering to help them out with the position or other roles. That is the single best way to get noticed and to stay visible in front of them on a regular basis.
Yeah, a lot of good points there. I think you make it pretty clear that just applying on LinkedIn or sending your resume in is the bare minimum, right? And then actually standing out or getting the job like the job itself requires actual work, right? I mean, just you need to do more than the bare minimum. And I don't know if that maybe you could speak to has that's probably was the case in the 90s and it's the case now. I mean, you may just have to stand out a little bit more now, but
Yeah, I don't think that's ever changed. I mean, it certainly changes in terms of how strong the job market is. I mean, back in 2021, the Great Resignation everybody talked about, it was much easier to find positions and much easier to get noticed and get interviewed because there were a record number of jobs. It was a record number of private equity placements and SPACs and M&A activity and IPOs, and people were just hiring like crazy coming out of the really difficult time of COVID in 2020, and nobody knew how long the uptrend was going to last, so they were hiring left and right. So in that situation where there's a big uptick in the overall economy, then it certainly is easier to get noticed. But even in those times, you still want to do what you can to really understand what the job is you're applying to, and to really stand out. And there are things about your resume itself these days, like the days of writing a cover letter, they've kind of come and gone. If you're applying to a job that's in academia or in government or defense, sure, a cover letter is probably still more appropriate. But the majority of jobs out there that are private sector, you don't want to spend much time, if at all, on your cover letter. You want to make sure that your resume is customized, as I mentioned before, and that your resume it's very clear as soon as someone sees your resume why you're applying to that job, because you're clearly a fit. Right. The average time that an HR executive or a hiring manager spends looking at a resume in the first go round, the first pass through, is about 15 to 20 seconds. So if you're not getting your point across that you are a fit for this job right away, immediately, you're going to be passed over. So you've got to make sure that your headline, the top of your resume, really hits home and is very relevant.
I mean, that's a good point, right? Because and I didn't even know this. I thought, you should be submitting a cover letter, but then I would think, wow, I have to write a different cover letter for every position I'm considering. It's just not going to happen. And I think you make a really good point that if they're only looking at your resume for 15 seconds, they're not reading a 4-paragraph cover letter that's going to take them 5 minutes to read. So maybe my question on this is, how do people that don't have experience or just graduating college, how do they learn this etiquette or these strategies? What do you recommend they do in that regard, right? Because if nobody teaches you, if your parents didn't teach you how to interview, how to apply for jobs, you're kind of just thrown out there into the world and you don't know what to do. So do you have any recommendations there? Because obviously it's a very important skill.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot easier to figure out what to do these days. I mean, honestly, if you just Google, job search in YouTube or search on it in YouTube, you're going to get literally millions of videos that will come up. People talk about the etiquette of sending a resume, talk about the etiquette of job interview. What should you wear? What should you say? How do you prepare the questions? The focus on the position itself. How do you do your research to find out more about the company before your interview? What kind of questions should you expect? Right, and how do you prepare for those also? So it's a lot easier to prepare these days just with the internet, and obviously with generative AI and ChatGPT, that's even easier still, because you can do that in a pretty simple manner also. So again, it comes down to, I'm amazed at how often people, even folks that have 4-year college degrees that have worked for a couple larger companies, and they show up for an interview and they are just not prepared at all. And they put the entire responsibility of that interview going well on the interviewer, when they are the interviewee. They're the candidate looking for the job, and it's their job, it's their responsibility to show up, be prepared, have questions ready to go, show that you've actually, demonstrate that you've actually researched the company, what the job is, what the company does, what their challenges might be, what are some of the trends in that company's industry, those kinds of things. If you can't demonstrate any of those things in your interview, then you're doomed to fail from the get-go. And certainly, I know I'm speaking primarily to white collar, or at least slightly higher level or management type positions. If you're looking for your first job and you're working in the warehouse, or you're doing a lot of supply chain work for Amazon in one of their distribution centers, or you're doing a frontline job at a restaurant or at a retailer, it's a little bit different, certainly. But even in those situations, you really should know what that company, what that retailer, what the restaurant, what the distribution center, what they're all about. right? You can do a lot of research online very, very quickly, very easily to get at least some glimpse of what life is going to be like in that organization. So it'll allow you to ask the right questions during the interview, and then B, it'll also allow you to be more prepared for the questions that'll be thrown at you during the interview also. So those are the ways to really stand out without a whole heck of a lot of extra legwork.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're not doing those things right, as someone that has conducted interviews in the past, you're kind of wasting both parties' time, right? Where they you're not going to interview well, so you're not going to get the position, and the hiring manager had to take the time to interview. So I mean, it just doesn't make a lot of sense, right?
Right, right. Yeah, we're about to release one of our own podcasts about ghosting, for example. And I can tell you the flip side of your question about how do you stand out. I can tell you how you can get forgotten very quickly. And the single best way to do that is to ghost somebody. Whether you are a company interviewing, scheduling an interview with a candidate, and the company decides to, for whatever reason, doesn't show up, and beyond just an emergency happening, they just flat out don't show up. The job isn't available anymore. They already hired somebody, they promoted someone from within, whatever it might be. But if you're an employer and you don't show up to interview a candidate, or if you are the candidate and you scheduled an interview and you've confirmed it, and then you flat out just bail on the interview and don't show up for it, there is no faster way to really get, kind of get on the bad list. I'll say it nicely, on the bad list of that company, and really kind of cancel yourself. I mean, you're asking them to stop calling you. You're telling them, hey, I don't care enough about you as the company, about you as the hiring manager, or about you as the job, to even show up for the interview. And at that point, they're never going to call you back. I don't care how good your skills are, how unique your background is. If you ghost an employer and you just don't show up for the interview, that is a single fastest way to lose all credibility.
And do you see that have, I mean, further negative effects, right, from a networking perspective? If you ghost a hiring manager, then they broadcast
Oh
that
yeah.
and out into their network, or you apply for another job and you didn't know that the two hiring managers knew each other, and they ask about, hey, how's John? And she says, oh yeah, he didn't even show up for the interview, and you kind of shoot yourself in the foot, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Especially if you're trying to apply to another job at the same company later on, that happens. And yeah, not only hiring managers talking to each other, but just the systems that a lot of those companies have in place. That if the internal recruiter or HR manager is doing their job, they're putting notes in there and they're indicating this person didn't show up for the interview. So then when that person applies to a second job, let's say a month later, then the notes are in there and that person is not going to get an interview. So yeah, to your point, definitely there's that network effect. And the same thing again goes for employers. If you are a company that is ghosting a candidate and you're not showing up to interview that candidate for a job, that candidate's going to get pretty upset. And these days with Glassdoor and TikTok and everything else out there, people are not afraid to share what bad experiences they have. And you as an employer are going to really destroy your employment brand if you continually ghost people, especially if you're looking for very technical talent or very specialized talent where that community is very, very tight. And people share things on a regular basis, whether it's through X or whether it's through TikTok or whatever platform it might be, even on Instagram these days. So you're really asking for trouble if you as an employer ghost a candidate and don't show up for the interview. The least you can do, all you have to do is just say, Sally Smith, Tom, whatever your name is, I'm sorry, this job actually ended up getting filled from within. I apologize. I know we had an interview scheduled. I'm looking forward to keeping you on my radar screen for future jobs. It takes all of 10 seconds for a hiring manager or HR person to do that, and at least have the professional courtesy and the common courtesy to give that person a heads up, so they're not just sitting there waiting by themselves on Zoom, wondering why they're by themselves.
And do you see that pretty frequently in your experience, or is it more of a rare occurrence? I mean, I've never seen that, or I've never really thought about that, or even considered that may happen.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's. I mean, it depends. I wouldn't say it's frequent, but there was a survey just done by Indeed recently, and it said that about 75% of the people surveyed had either been ghosted or they had ghosted somebody else. So one of the two scenarios, but about 3/4 of the people. So that's quite a few. And unfortunately, the percentage of job seekers that now think it's okay to ghost a company is now up to about 33%, which is ridiculous. It's hard to imagine that 1 in 3 people thinks it's okay to just not show up, for an interview. It's like, if you're going to have dinner with your friend you wouldn't just flat out not show up because you already ate, right? So
Hmm.
if you have an interview set up and you happen to get a job somewhere else, you don't not show up for the interview. You got to at least tell that client or that company, thanks so much for the interview. I apologize. I'm going to go ahead and cancel. I did get a job somewhere else. I'm looking forward to staying in touch. Again, it's just common courtesy. So I wouldn't say it's happening everywhere, but it's happening often enough that it is on a lot of people's radar screens, and it's really inappropriate and completely unprofessional.
Yeah, no, I agree. I want to talk about compensation for a bit because I think you talked about it earlier, right? We're kind of coming out of COVID 2021, easy money, private equity, IPOs, a lot of hiring. And now I'm curious of what you consider the state of the job market and the economy to be, because the stock market's at an all-time high, unemployment's really low, but everything is incredibly expensive and inflation's also a trend. So, I mean, what's your sense of the state of the economy? Are there still plentiful jobs out there? And then I also want to talk about compensation from a cost of living perspective. $100,000 is not what it used to be. And so how are companies handling that and balancing that with also their need to be a profitable organization? So kind of a two-part question, but just wanted to pick your brain on that as well.
Yeah, those are some really really big questions for sure. We could take hours to answer that, especially about the
Yeah.
economy and what's going on a macro scale. But yeah, I think inflation. I was an econ major in college, so I love all this data and all these stats anyway. But inflation is coming down. From its peak of about 8.1%, 8.5% a year and a half or so ago. Now it's coming down. It's about depending upon which reading you look at, anywhere from 2.7, 2.9 to 3.1. So that's going in the right direction. That's as far as inflation goes. And interest rates are also coming down, which means that it's people will start to buy houses again because they can actually either do a refi or afford a new mortgage, which is positive. Also, same when it comes to buying cars and that kind of thing. That's positive. But we also have a pretty sizable amount of savings out there. There's a lot of what they call dry powder out there, which is money on the sidelines that hasn't been put to work yet. Whether that's talking about the stock market or about people just buying things. I mean, the retail sales numbers from this past holiday season were much higher, about double what people were actually expecting, and so the consumer continues to be very strong. So the money is there, and people are making decent money. A lot of people got significant raises in 2021 and 22, which is very positive. There's a lot of frontline workers that finally got the acknowledgement and the increase in compensation as a result of COVID that they had been lacking for many years. Walmart has steadily increased every year their starting compensation, their hourly, their compensation levels for their managers and directors as well. So that's all going very well. The minimum wage has increased in multiple states across the country over the last 24 months, including California now, where I live here. It's $20 an hour in North County, San Diego. That's a lot. I mean, that is a lot of money compared to what it used to be. But to your point, with the cost of living being as high as it is, especially here in Southern California, it definitely goes far, but it doesn't go as far as you might think. So there's a lot of different factors that come into play there. Unions have gotten very strong, and they've really kind of rediscovered their voice where they've been dormant for a long time. Also because of COVID and all these unions, whether it was the strike among writers and actors up in Hollywood, whether it was a strike for GM and Ford and all the unions there. So they have a stronger say, so they're getting higher compensation. Granted, unionization is still only about 11 or 12% of total employees compared to what it was back in the 80s, which was more like 45, 48%. So it's still a small percentage overall of the economy, but those people that are in a union, they have a stronger voice, and so they're getting higher compensation. So all those things are playing together. It's a very there's multiple moving parts, if you will, from that perspective. But I do think that people that have in demand, high demand skill sets have been much more able to kind of leverage those skills and parlay that into a higher compensation rate. We just every year twice a year we do a pretty comprehensive compensation guide. And in 2021 and 22 and even early last year, we were seeing increases across the board for sales and marketing and operations and HR and the C-suite leadership, increases of 20, 25, 30% year over year, which is really sizable. And we finally have seen that now kind of level off. So a lot of people got those raises, got substantially more income over the last couple of years. Those that were able to change jobs or ask for a raise got that, which is great. And now it's kind of leveled off. So raises are still happening, but they're back to more kind of the 3 to 5% more typical raise versus the 15-20% raises and bonuses that we saw, during the heyday over the last several years. So that's the first thing there in terms of compensation. And in terms of your second question, I think was more around what we can do was it more around kind of asking what we can do to increase our compensation by asking about it, or was it more how do you leverage the skill into a compensation?
It was more our companies considering rate, and you kind of answered it. Do they have their radar on raising compensation considering inflation? And I think part of this stems from, right, I mean, I don't know if you watch or see, like there will be viral TikToks about someone who's Gen Z, they've just entered the workforce and they're like, I can't do this. I'm living in a downtown apartment and my salary barely covers my rent. And what am I supposed to do, right? So I don't know if that's more just a microcosm or if it's always kind of been that way, right? I mean, if I think back to when I entered the workforce, I said, okay, well, I'm not gonna pay $3,000 rent in San Francisco. I'm gonna live with family instead. So I don't know if it's always been that way or if you think it is much worse now for those entering the workforce or those that are working lower end jobs in terms of making ends meet.
Yeah, I would say, and across the board, in a very general response, I would say yes, it's more difficult. But I also would say that really depends on, it's very contextual. It depends upon the type of job and also the region of the country. I mean, so for example, here in Southern California, my oldest son is 26, and he and his wife both work. They just got married last year, and they combined make a decent amount of money, a little over $100,000 a year. But that's with two jobs, right? If they were each making half of that on their own, it'd be really difficult to have a decent apartment without a roommate here in San Diego. Rents here are quite expensive, right? And compensation levels for starting employees, those that are at least not engineers or developers or really technical, experts, those compensation levels really make it difficult to survive on your own. That's why so many other folks that are in Gen Z are going back home and living with their parents for a while. Even either trying to save money up so they can eventually buy their own place, or because they just need to save up to be able to get out there and even just rent a place based on the cost of living in their particular region. So I think certain parts of the country, like where I am in Southern California, it's definitely much more expensive and much more difficult these days. But I think the caveat to that is that because of COVID and because there are so many more companies now that are willing to hire remotely, you can live in a place like Nashville or a place like Atlanta or Salt Lake City or what have you, places that are less expensive, but you can be working for a company that's based in the Bay Area or New York or Chicago, or what have you, and you're earning a higher compensation based on your skill set because that company may actually be based in a higher cost of living region of the country. So that's much more common and much more readily available these days than it's ever been, for sure. But yeah, I think it's and I think honestly, that's one of the reasons, a whole nother conversation, but one of the reasons I think that Gen Z has such a different perspective on work and why they work is because they've seen the cost of education go through the roof. They've seen, obviously with COVID and frontline workers and other folks not really get paid what they should get paid. They've seen their parents, being burdened with debt for a long time for whatever, various reasons out there. And Gen Z, I think, is much better than the rest of us. I'm Gen X, right? And I'm 54. So I think Gen Z is the best generation out there when it comes to realizing that work and life should be balanced. We shouldn't be just, our lives are not about work. Work is one part of our life, but it's okay to shut that off and work an 8-hour day and be done with that. Now, it may mean that you don't get ahead as fast. Maybe you don't climb the corporate ladder into that management role as fast as maybe some other generations would have, but that's okay. As long as you're happy in your role or happy enough in your role, you're never going to be happy 100% of the time. Every job has its downsides, right? Even for someone like me who owns his own company, not everything is great, right? You have to do certain things that you don't enjoy. But as long as you're happy enough in that role and you're making enough money to sustain yourself, then that's okay. You don't have to work, 60, 70 hours a week and kill yourself just to try to get ahead to make an extra $5,000 or $10,000 here or there. It's just not worth it. And I think so Gen Z has done a really good job of, I think, shining a light on the importance of having that balance. I mean, a great example is that, as we all know, Americans are terrible at taking vacation. Right? We get the least amount of vacation of any, developed country in the world. But not only that, we actually use the smallest amount of the small amount that we get. I do a lot of work internationally with companies that are over in Europe, and they're getting, 6, 8, 12, weeks a year in vacation, depending upon the country, and they're taking it. They're gone for the whole month of August. They're gone for 2.5, 3 weeks out of December, and again in September. So I mean, they have a much better understanding and relationship with their work life, as opposed to just literally living to work. And I think we need more of that here in the U.S. And I think Gen Z is really coming around to seeing that.
So I'm curious how you've seen that work where you have Gen Z entering the workforce and you Gen X, baby boomers are in those leadership positions, and how that desire for them to have more work-life balance, and then people that have, grinded away for years on end, and then they have to manage these people. If you have any recommendations on how to make that mix work, or make sure that the relationship works well together.
Yeah, I think it's really funny because, I mean, like I said, I've been doing this for 27 years, for quite a while, and every generation complains about the one that comes after them. Right? Baby boomers complain about my generation and Gen X. Oh, they don't have, they're too independent, right? They're too willing to go off and do things on their own. They don't follow the rules all the time. And then Gen X was in leadership positions and started, buying and or building companies. And they said, oh, millennials, they just don't have the work ethic, and they just, they don't commit, they don't stick with something. They're too focused around their personal lives, and those things are too important, and they're terrible. And then millennials get into leadership positions, and they're buying companies and they're running companies. And now they're saying, Gen Z, oh my gosh, they are just too focused around work-life balance, and they care too much about being happy and mental health and this and that. So every generation invariably complains about the one that comes next. It's just nature of the beast. But what I find interesting is that the leaders out there, we are leaders because we are, supposedly more mature in our business decisions. We've got more business acumen, more business sophistication, just by nature of how many years we've been doing this, which makes sense. We are the ones as leaders that have to model how we want our teams to operate. We have to model that. As a leader, you adapt to your team. You don't apply a one size fits all to every person on your team, no matter how small or big it is, just because you're a leader and you want to manage them the way that you were managed when you were coming up. That's not the way that you lead. You have to adapt. And you may not agree with everything that Gen Z does or millennials do. Regardless, you have to adapt to that. And you got to figure out what are the things that really kind of get them going, what motivates them, what's important to them. Then you, as that leader, as that manager, you have to adapt to manage them accordingly. So it's difficult. I mean, there's 5 generations that are in the workforce now. It's been that way for a handful of years, but the first time it's ever happened is over the last 10 years. And we've got to adjust. I mean, the Gen Zers out there, they're not going to change. Right? They are not going to, kind of compromise, if you will, their morals and their beliefs and their ethics to do something just because, their boss, who happens to be a Gen Xer, thinks about things in a different way. There's got to be some adjustment there, some adaptability. But the good thing is that when you, as a leader, take that time, and when you spend time to get to know your employees and be able to manage them independently and as an individual person, you'll be amazed by how engaged your employee is, and how loyal they are, and how much they want to help, and how many great ideas they have. If you allow a bottom up type of an environment to take place and take hold in your organization, you'll be floored by how many great ideas come up from frontline workers. It doesn't have to always come from the C-suite or from somebody who has a VP title in front of their name. You really would get a lot of value out of your team, even the Gen Zers as well, because they see things through a different lens, and they grew up in a very different age, and you're going to get a lot of different perspectives from them if you allow that to happen. So I think it takes work. I know I'm making it kind of seem kind of simplistic. It takes work. It takes effort. We all want to manage people and work with people that look and sound and operate and think like we do. That's just the nature of being, human beings. But we got to realize that the power of an organization comes in diversity. diversity of thought, people that are doing things a different way from a different background. Some might have a college degree, some might have a PhD, some didn't maybe just finish high school and they were working all through high school and they had to support, several siblings. They didn't get a college degree, but they are really wicked smart and they can bring a lot to your organization, even without that 4-year college degree. So we have to kind of be able to acknowledge different ways of bringing value to an organization.
So you just mentioned it again there, and it kind of came up in my previous question around the 4-year degree, the traditional higher education. I'm curious if you have a specific take on that. You mentioned that it is, from a cost standpoint, it has gone sky high. And myself, I even question, like, okay, it was a great experience. Yes, I learned a lot, but considering what I've done in my career, I just don't see how it directly related. It just seems to be like a traditional path. We've always said, hey, you have to go get your 4-year degree and then you enter the workforce. I'm just curious if you feel strongly one way or another, or if you see that changing in the future. And what companies are thinking, right? Or if it is a white collar tech company or biotech, I'm assuming they're going to still want 4-year degrees, but maybe not. Where is higher education headed?
Yeah, again, this is back to what I said earlier on as well about, how companies look to fill positions. And the kind of de facto knee-jerk reaction that you include in every job description is, 4-year degree required, which is, like you said a minute ago, it's just because that's what it's always been. But the reality is not every job, every function needs a 4-year degree. In many cases, having, real world experience, going out there and having worked and been in sales or been on the factory floor or been on the bench in a biotech space, whatever it might be, that's probably more valuable than having that 4-year degree where you sat in the classroom for 4 years. So it really depends on the position. But I think, there's a whole debate out there and conversation around, where does knowledge come from? What does knowledge entail? It used to be for many, many years that knowledge was synonymous with a 4-year degree. You got it from a physical, not just virtual, but a physical institution. You went to this school for 4 years or 2 years or whatever it was, and that's how you got your quote unquote knowledge. But the reality is that that's not where knowledge comes from. Like I said, you can go on YouTube and you can learn so many different things, whether it's playing an instrument or whether it's cooking or how to manage or how to, do whatever, make clothes. I mean, fix a car, you name it. You can learn so much just from YouTube, for example, or from Coursera or some of the other things that are out there, other online learning centers. That's not a 4-year degree. It's not a traditional education, but you're getting a lot of the same knowledge. Now, there's something to be said for the social aspect and the ability to socialize and interact with other people out there in education at a 4-year university. So long as you're at a university that actually does allow for, a healthy debate and it's not all one side or the other, right? Which is a whole nother conversation. But there is certainly something about that, without question. But who's to say that you can't get that same experience working in an environment where you are one of 15 people or 50 people in a call center, and everybody comes from a different background. Nobody has a college degree except maybe the VP in that organization. But you're still working alongside people that have a lot of very diverse backgrounds. So knowledge, what knowledge is or where it comes from is really being reconsidered and reconfigured as well. And I think companies would do very, very well, especially those industries that have been really hard hit, whether it's manufacturing or trucking, for example, or some jobs that are more menial type tasks. What can they do to attract more people? Or if they're trying to attract a more diverse workforce, right, then you've got to look for different ways to hire people. And one of those ways is to get rid of the requirement for every job that you have to have a 4-year degree. Because again, in some cases you do need to, but in many, many cases, you really don't have to have that. And that's where it takes more time and energy by the hiring manager and by HR also to say, okay, let's think about this job. What is it about a 4-year degree that really lends itself to this job? More than just, the check that box kind of thing, that paper. Is it really required? Or can we find somebody who has the commensurate experience, who maybe never went to college, but has been working for the last, 10 or 12 years, and they have the equivalent to that experience and that knowledge? So it's part of this shift, I think, in how we work and also how we hire that's going on right now, largely as a result of COVID.
Yeah, a lot of good points. And I think that for the universities as well, they just need to make sure that there's a proper ROI, right? You can't be putting people 80 grand into debt and then they only get a $50,000 a year job and then they cannot afford to buy a home and start a family. I mean, at some point, just something has to give, right? So, and we'll see, right, what happens in the future.
I agree. Yeah, and there was a great article in Wall Street Journal maybe a month or so ago talking about how difficult it is for CPA firms and for law firms to find great talent. Because, as you just mentioned, the expense of going to law school or getting your CPA, it's 5, 6, 7 years of school and all that debt. And when you come out of school, at least for a starting CPA, it's about $55,000, $60,000 salary. That's going to take a long time to recoup the debt that you're now in to make it worth your while. And so a lot of CPA firms are now looking at majors that are not accounting or finance majors to try to bring marketing folks in and communications people in and econ majors into the CPA firms because they are just having a hard time finding people. The same goes for law school as well. So yeah, to your point, yeah, you can't put somebody in that much debt without be able to show a path to paying that back.
I always thought too, I don't know if there's any truth to this, that it's kind of a way to make people beholden to that profession, right? If you spend all that money becoming an MD and you go into all that debt and then you start practicing as a primary care physician and you say, actually, I don't like this. It's kind of like, well, too bad. You got to make this work for at least, the foreseeable future. I don't know if there's any truth to that, but yeah, I mean, the cost has to be addressed, right? And I mean, I work on healthcare, not a doctor, but on the insurance side, and I know there's a shortage of physicians as well. And so what is preventing that? I mean, I think it's the financial and time burden of becoming a doctor. So it's an interesting point.
Yeah, and one of the things that we do as a recruiting firm when we're talking to our clients and doing kickoff call to launch a brand new search, we're really peeling back the layers and talking to them about, okay, it says here that you need a college degree for this job. Let's talk about that. Is that really necessary? And that's kind of our due diligence to figure out how can we find a way to expand the talent pool and bring more candidates to the table for our client and benefiting them if they just kind of take a little more time to think about whether or not you really have to have a college degree or do you really have to have experience in this specific industry. Can you come from an ancillary industry and still bring the great ideas and knowledge to the table? And that's what we do as a recruiting company to help our companies see that there's some other avenues to pursue to find great candidates.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. One question, and maybe we can end with this because I want to talk to you about this because I'm really interested in it, is that I believe, or you can correct me if I'm wrong, that most, if not almost all the baby boomers have reached retirement age and left the workforce for the most part. And I know as someone that's part of Gen X, I'm a millennial, that Gen X is a smaller generation than the baby boomers in the United States. So I don't know if that's on your radar or company's radar, or if I'm even on track here and thinking that, okay, this is going to leave kind of a vacuum in the workforce and in leadership positions. And then how is that overcome in the United States? And then secondly, I know you said you do a lot of work in Europe. I know that the millennials were a result of the baby boomers coming home from World War II. And there's not really a huge millennial generation in Germany, for example. So I don't know if Europe is that's on the radar even more in terms of finding young people that can fill this vacuum left by baby boomers. So just curious your take on that.
Yeah, well, I think, I mean, in general, I think so. So yeah, I think your statement was correct that there's a very large portion of baby boomers that have reached retirement, but they all haven't left the workforce. There's still an awful lot that are out there without question. But I think the numbers like 10,000 baby boomers are reaching retirement age every day. Retirement age being 65. Now, are they actually leaving the workforce every day? No, they're not. There's a lot of folks that I know out there that are still running companies that are either running companies, even starting companies in their 60s, or they are consultants. So they're still in the workforce, but they are technically reaching retirement age 10,000 per day. That's a lot. And I can't remember what the actual number is of baby boomers, but the generation, your generation, millennials, that's about 79 million people, if I recall. My generation is less than half that, about 31 million. So yeah, just by virtue of the numbers out there, there's a vacuum without question. And and the challenge. So I guess to your question, how do you fill that gap, right? How do you make up for that vacuum out there? There's no easy way to do it. But there are some things you can do. Like, for example, one of the benefits, quote unquote, from COVID is that because so many people were able to work remotely, right, hybrid or remote, that it allowed a lot of women who are of working age and were certainly capable, but they were taking care of kids or of their parents, the elderly, right? That they couldn't work when they had to go to an office 5 days a week. When COVID came along and so many people were starting to work from home, it allowed a lot of women to re-enter the workforce. And so the labor force participation rate for women increased to almost record numbers, which is great. So there's one example of how we can increase the talent pool a little bit by doing things like that and allowing for a remote, working situation. You can also, again, back to what I said before, not always ask for a college degree, right? There are a lot of people that are very capable that are coming out of the military, for example. They may have a college degree or they may not, but what they did in the military, on paper, the terminology might look different, but the mindset, how they think and what they had to do, what they were charged with, what they were responsible for, a lot of that is very transferable. And it's incumbent upon companies to realize, okay, let's look at a different part of the labor pool to fill that vacuum that you're talking about, to make up for the fact that there's 10,000 people hitting retirement age every single day. There are other pools of candidates out there, of talent out there, that are not being tapped into simply because, again, they don't fit the traditional mold of what we've always thought you need to have to be a VP of sales or to be a director of operations or a warehouse leader, whatever it might be, because they have slightly different background without a college degree or they came from the military or what have you. So those are some examples of things that we can do as a society to really help that. Overseas, yeah, it depends. From country to country, it really depends. If you look at the population and demographics and around Japan, for example, or parts of Europe, Germany is going through a very difficult time right now, not just because of the aging population, but just in general. But they have a lot of older workers out there, and Germany is very much, reliant on their very high tech manufacturing sector. But there are fewer and fewer people that are going to school to become, electricians and machinists and all those kinds of things, which is true in the US as well. And someone's got to do that work. You can't automate all of that. A robot can't do all of that. It doesn't make any sense. So we've got to find ways to look for people in different areas to try to, kind of supplement the more limited talent pool that's out there.
Yeah,
it's a big question. It's a great question. It's a big one, but yeah.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting. As time goes on and technology increases, population, seems to be decreasing across the world. But anyways, so maybe we can close. I'll give you the floor, but I'm also curious, maybe you can just end with some advice for somebody out there that's listening to this that wants to take the next step in their career. They want that promotion, whether it's into a C-suite position, into management, whatever it is, improving their career, improving their skill set from a career perspective. What do you recommend they do? What's the lowest hanging fruit, the first step they can take?
It's really all about communication. And I think a lot of employees kind of wait for their career to happen to them rather than realizing that they have agency. They have control over what happens over the course of their 40+ year career. They really do have more control than they think. And communication is what it's all about. That's where it starts. So if you are a warehouse manager, or you are an account executive, or you're somebody that's doing research in a biotech lab, and your goal is to get into a leadership position in 5, 10, whatever number of years it might be, then it's incumbent upon you to go to your manager, your boss, and say, here's my goal long term. Here's where I want to get to. I want to get into your job, or I want to go this direction or that direction. What do you recommend? What do you think I should do? What can I do? What do I need in my experience over the next 5 or 10 years to really kind of punch that ticket, so to speak, and have the skills necessary to get into that role? So that communication is really important. Back to our comments earlier about networking as well. If you can find somebody who might be either a formal or informal mentor that is 1 or 2 levels above you, that can also provide you with guidance, right? To be that guide for you and that voice of reason, but also someone that's going to hold you accountable, that's going to push you out of your comfort zone, that's going to help you to figure out how do you get to that next step, and you're going to be able to see how they got to where they are today by seeing their footsteps and kind of what steps they took as well. So mentorship is also really, really big. And if you're in an organization where you feel like where I want to get to is not going to happen here, that's okay. Then that's more important again to build out your network and start to talk to people that are in other organizations that you want to get into where there is that upward mobility, and you will have the chance to change roles out there. That's again back to, I know I keep saying LinkedIn, but a great way to do that is through LinkedIn, and find people that are in the jobs that you eventually want to get to, and figure out, is there something you can do a search on LinkedIn. For example, let's say you're a marketing manager and eventually you want to be a chief marketing officer. You can go into LinkedIn and do a search for other people that grew up in the same region, that are from the same part of the country, that went to the same school that you went to if you got a college degree, or that even work in the same industry. And you can do that search for them that are chief marketing officers, and just simply reach out to them. Hey, I've got 5 years of experience. I'm a marketing manager with this company. I would love to get into a CMO role long-term in my career. I see that you've done that. I would love to chat with you for 15, 20 minutes and just, pick your brain a little bit. Would you be open to that? And not everybody's going to say yes, obviously, but you'll be surprised. I mean, everybody who does want to help, or not, most people want to help. And we all that are in senior level positions remember what it was like starting off in our careers early on in our 20s. And we want to provide some support, some guidance, and some give back. So as long as if you ask for it, if you're the one that initiates that as the person looking for that career track, then chances are you're going to get some takers that are going to be willing to help you out.
Yeah, no, I think that's great actionable advice, right? You have to take action and seek out what you want, right? So I think that's a great way to close it out. I'll leave the floor to you to end here. Why don't you let people know where they can find you, your company, and your podcast, whatever you'd like to promote.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, so I'm all over LinkedIn. Obviously, as you can tell, it's just Ken Schmitt with 2 T's at the end. And TurningPoint Executive Search is my company name, and we're also all over LinkedIn there. Our podcast is actually, we're just now changing the brand. It's called Hiring Matters. And so we're just starting our 3rd season at the end of this month in late February 24. But Hiring Matters, is out there as well. And then my book is called The Practical Optimist, which I published in February of last year of 23. And you can find that on Amazon or our website or wherever. But it's really kind of about, all the things we talked about in this conversation about getting into leadership and, owning your mistakes and being, resilient and persevering, and the importance of having a network and having a diverse workforce. I touch on all those things in my book, also The Practical Optimist, and that might be a helpful kind of primer for you out there. Thank you.
Awesome, Ken. Yeah, I'll link all that stuff down in the description. Hey, I appreciate you taking the time. I learned a lot. And hopefully someone else out there finds value from it as well. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It was a great conversation. Looking forward to keeping it going.